It's morally okay to pirate all of Nintendo's games. This is a phrase that I have seen pop up quite a bit in recent years. The origins of this quote can date all the way back to the Jimquisition video made in 2017. In addition to all of the fun and terrible anti-customer stuff that Nintendo has done over the years, there was an issue that many Nintendo YouTubers had where Nintendo would go out of their way to copyright claim their videos in order to get that little bit of ad revenue that they were receiving. Because, God forbid somebody makes any money while praising Nintendo and giving them free advertisement. It's kind of insane to me that over the course of the past 8 years, I don't think that sentiment has changed. If anything, I feel like it's gotten a little bit more intense. To the extent of which I've seen it evolve to the point where people are saying that you are morally obligated to pirate Nintendo's games. And honestly, I completely understand it. Whether you agree or disagree with the sentiment, in all of history, time and again we've seen that the more greed and the more aggressive a person, or in this case a corporation, is towards the individuals or customers that they are serving, the stronger the pushback from said customers. In essence, piracy becomes a form of protest for many Nintendo fans. And the most effective protests are often blurring the lines of what's legal and what isn't. And while this may be something as simple as gaming is unfortunately a very integral part of our culture. And the more that culture becomes a luxury, the more that it becomes prohibitively expensive, the more inaccessible it becomes to the masses, well, that's when the equal and opposite reaction occurs. Now, the issue is with Nintendo's case, it's not only about price. For many customers, it's about the neglectful disrespect that they felt from Nintendo. This could date way back to when people lost upwards of $100 in Wii Virtual Console games because they didn't make it very simple to recover lost titles. Or it could be the fact that Nintendo sold people a bunch of faulty Joy-Cons, never corrected the issue, and until they were forced to repair those things by each jurisdiction in which they were facing the issues, they simply covered their ears and said that you just need to wash your hands before playing with these controllers if you want them to last. I discussed this pretty in depth in my channel already, but one of the other issues is the fact that you used to be able to game share pretty easily with your friends using one digital copy and play online at the same time. This was a very popular feature for the Switch, especially in families that had multiple Switches for their kids. But leading up to the launch of the Switch 2, there was a forced update on every console to end this feature. And of course, this is made all of the better with the forced arbitration clause that they required everybody to opt into, which basically said that if you have an issue, you can't sue us. And then, of course, in this day and age, they're trigger-happy disconnecting of online services after the purchase of their console, which in this day and age, with the type of hardware and software that Nintendo is putting out, might as well be considered bricking. These are all very valid reasons for people, actually no, for Nintendo fans to feel like they've been hard done by a company that they've given probably thousands of dollars to at this point. And many of them did so willingly. They willingly paid for online subscriptions that really should have been free. They've willingly repaid and overpaid for games as a way of supporting their favorite game company. And they've willingly accepted the bad because the good is great. But then, at some point in time, for all of these happy Nintendo fans over the course of the past 30-odd years, something breaks the camel's back. And usually it's not a straw. It's much bigger than that. And then when that happens, where else are they going to turn to but the 7 Seas? Because piracy is a form of protest. It actually very well may be the only form of protest that is effectively available for Nintendo fans that feel hard done by the company they've given money to. Now you can argue voting with your wallet is an option, but that's about as effective as writing a letter to your local congressman, in that it is not effective at all. It's just one of those fancy buzzwords that people say in order to quiet you down. Like, yeah, that's a big issue. We should send a letter to our congressman and they'll solve it. No, that doesn't solve anything. And neither does voting with your wallet, unless an entire collective agrees to do it together. But again, when you're going up against a corporation this large, while voting with your wallet is very important and very effective, it's only a piece of the pie, right? You gotta do a lot more than that, right? You gotta hit them where it hurts. This is obviously not my opinion, right? I would never pirate Nintendo games. I'm just breaking down why many people feel like they are morally obligated to pirate Nintendo games. Because, let's be real, the one weakness that Nintendo has ever shown since their 80s until now is their fear of piracy. Now, what Nintendo views to be piracy is mostly not actually piracy, but depending on who you ask, they might think emulating anything is piracy. And I don't think I need to break down the difference between emulation and infringement and theft. I've done it before, and anybody that doesn't already know what the difference is probably clicked away in the first minute because they felt the need to call the FBI and send them towards my channel. But as I was saying, the one weakness Nintendo has shown towards anything in the gaming industry over the course of the past 30 odd years is their fear of piracy. And, well, also their fear of Sony beating them again. So naturally, the hard-done Nintendo fan will feel the need to hit them back where it hurts the most. Whether it's emulating a title that they may or may not have purchased, creating a fan game, overclocking their device so that the game that they purchase runs better, or has a better camera angle, allowing for more cinematic angles on their YouTube videos, or, in the current generation of Nintendo, just outright downloading a Switch 1 version of a Switch 2 edition game for free and playing it on their very strong PC at 4K and 60 frames per second because they want to. With the release of Pokemon Legends ZA, we are truly entering a new era of Nintendo. So obviously, Nintendo is not going to be moving on from the Nintendo Switch 1. They've shown their cards. They very much plan on making this a dual generation, with the Switch 2 effectively being like the new 3DS, where it gets a few exclusive titles. With the lack of a price drop for the original Switch, it seems pretty clear that the Switch 1 is going to be their budget option. Their full-priced and even more expensive than it was at launch budget option. So much so that they decided to make the Switch 2 edition something that is basically integral to the Switch 2 experience. The Switch 1 version is the base version, and the Switch 2 edition, well, it's the one that works on the Switch 2 with the upgrade pack. But this brings up an issue. It's the first time in history where, with the start of a new console generation, the previous console is still very strong, still going to be supported well into the future, and most importantly, is way more expensive than it should be, and its games are all still full price. You see, when we moved on to the Nintendo Switch, the Wii U and the 3DS got discontinued pretty quickly. Now, in the case of the Wii U, obviously, they were jumping ship as fast as they can from that failure. And with the 3DS, it was a little bit different because they still wanted to keep a hold of that handheld market. The whole hybrid thing was still very much experimental. But the Switch 2 has way more synergy with the Switch than any other Nintendo console has with the previous version. And most importantly, the library of the Switch 2 includes the entirety of the Switch 1 library, still at full price and still purchasable from the shop on the Nintendo Switch 2. It's not like the 3DS where they're just going to support it for a year or two. No, the Switch 1 is going to stay for a while. But the Switch 1 has an emulator. The Switch 1 has a very strong mod scene. And like I stated earlier, the Switch 1 games are very expensive because they still need to be purchased as current gen titles for the next console. So while in the past, a patient gamer might have decided after the Switch came out that it was time for them to finally go and get a Wii U on the cheap and just fill up an entire Wii U library for a fraction of what they would have paid for, and likewise with the 3DS, paying a little bit of money for a lot of convenience, effectively. Since that's not possible with the Switch, the patient gamer that would have bought the previous console on a discount and purchased all of those games at a fraction of what they would have cost initially, instead is much more likely to turn to piracy. And the justification is very simple for them. They just have to look at the price and be like, this is absolutely highway robbery. I cannot believe they are charging this much for 8-year-old games. I am going to pirate them. Now, that's with games that are older. And right, in the case of a lot of these games, if you have even the weakest of PCs, you can probably already run the Switch 2 experience for your Switch 1 games on an emulator. Basically, pretty easily bumping up the visuals and performance of the title that you bought on the Switch 1. Something many people that spent $500 on and did not realize that they wouldn't automatically get that feature on a decent chunk of their games, especially the ones they have to pay for. But those are the older titles, right? In many cases, a lot of people already had those titles and they were waiting for the Switch 2 in order to get them at better performance. And once they realized that Nintendo was much scummier than they had anticipated, they easily could do that on their PC, and it's completely legal. Although honestly, for the sake of this video, the legality discussion kind of doesn't matter anymore, because we are talking about people that are intentionally going out of their way to protest via piracy. We're talking about the brand new titles that are coming out that are Switch 2 editions. With the release of Pokemon Legends, I have never seen more people excited to pirate something out of principle in my life. The amount of individuals online that are saying that they are downloading Pokemon Legends despite knowing that it's a terrible game because screw Nintendo, they deserve it, was not at all what I expected to see. People have excitedly downloaded Pokemon Legends ZA, taken the NSP file, throwing it on their PC, playing it on either Citron or whatever other emulator they want to use, following all the proper tutorials to make sure everything works, and upping their performance to 4K, and then taking that video and uploading it online because, well, even if Nintendo wanted to come after them, they could just be like, I don't know what you're talking about, this is my Switch 2 footage. It's a very unique situation where you can play a brand new title for a next-gen console by downloading the file for your previous generation console. I saw something similar a few weeks ago when Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 had came out, but that's a bit different because fans have already done more with Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 than Nintendo ever could with their overpriced re-release, which, need I remind you, is the lowest selling 3D Mario title, whether a re-release or not, in history, or at least lowest first few weeks of any 3D Mario title in history. So when it was happening with Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, I didn't really think much of it, but technically, somebody could very easily go out and grab the NSP file for the Switch 1 version of Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, throw it on their favorite emulator, up-res everything so that it runs and looks almost identical to how it does on the Switch 2, saving themselves $70 and getting the full Switch 2 experience. Although at that point, you're really saving yourself $570. And likewise, the same thing is going to happen with Metroid. How many Metroid fans do you know out there are no longer willing to buy a Nintendo console? Because I know a lot of them. I know a lot of people in person, and I know even more people now through my YouTube channel that will absolutely not buy a Switch 2, but they are going to be playing Metroid. And depending on where they draw their moral lines, some of them may decide to rip the NSP file from Metroid, throw it on the emulator, and enjoy it on their PC, allowing for full keyboard and mouse controls, not just Joy-Con mouse controls. And that might be the best case scenario for Nintendo, because they'd still be buying the Switch 1 version. The thing is, if you are that hardcore of a Nintendo fan, and you're that much of a Metroid fan, that you are so put off by Nintendo you refuse to buy their brand new next-gen console that we have all been very hyped for since at least 2022, and you're so tech-savvy that you're able to dump a file off of a cartridge, at that point, yeah, they're just gonna wait for it to leak online and pirate it, the same way all of the Pokemon fans are. And I'm kind of saying this to highlight the massive mistake and massive oversight that Nintendo is making here. For every person they decide to make an example of, every lawsuit, every cease and desist, their hope is that through this fearful tactic, they scare people into assuming that any form of emulation is enough to get them to owe Nintendo millions. But what they don't realize is the people that actually fall for this narrative are kind of the ones that are already afraid of piracy, if that makes sense. Like the ones that have already turned off this video by now, because they're afraid their ISP is going to send them a notice in the mail for listening to this video. Everybody else is just like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna download the next emulator and do the same thing I've always done. And it's not just that, it's the direct challenge that you put into the minds of these pirates, right? A pirate by nature is rebellious. That's part of the whole thing. Even the original pirates were rebellious. And you've spent time, ample time, dating all the way back to the mid-90s during your E3 Direct where you spent most of it talking about piracy, and even in 2001 where you had to mention piracy while holding the GameCube disc in your hand. And then just all of the lawsuits and ceases and desists and shutdowns, and now it's the patents. The false narratives that you've set with the excuse of protecting your IP, and the blatant lies and dishonesty where you refer to stuff as piracy when it is clearly not infringement. This does not scare pirates away. Again, I say this theoretically because I am not a pirate. All this does is motivate them. It's a challenge for them. And it's not even that challenging. It's gonna take 2 or 3 years of the Switch 2 being out until there are more than a handful of games that somebody would actually want to buy a Switch 2 for. Which means that for 2 or 3 years, the Switch 2 experience is basically a stronger Switch 1 experience. So effectively, somebody could get the entirety of the Switch 2 experience via emulation for free. And they have more reasons to do it today than they ever had in the past. Because it's not like over time Nintendo has stepped away from this ongoing tug of war. If anything, they've doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down, quintupled down on their aggressive tactics. So you get all of that, plus you get the modern Nintendo with their strongest anti-customer practices, their most obvious era of price gouging, their laziest production where they sell you the lowest quality for the highest price, increasing their profits by not only overcharging the end user, but significantly undercutting their production costs in order to make sure that profit margin is even larger. Basically, ripping people off. They are ruining gaming. There's no other way to put it. They're aggressively trying to bend the law to benefit them to actually shut down titles that have sold more than 20 million copies because they know that objectively that game is more appealing to the audience that used to buy their game. And they're selling it for cheaper, and perhaps even scarier for modern Nintendo, the product looks like it was made by somebody who was passionate about what they were doing. And that's like the last thing modern day Nintendo wants people to see. They don't want to see somebody making a game that looks like theirs with passion, because that would appeal to the customer's nostalgia more than anything that Nintendo is currently putting out. And at the end of the day, the only way Nintendo makes any money is through appealing to people's nostalgia. But the most unfortunate thing for Nintendo is that most of the people that have nostalgia for their games have that nostalgia because they pirated the old titles. Back then, they only did it because they felt like there was no other way for them to play the games. Well, now it seems like they're doing it not only to spite you, but to send a message. They have the money. They can very well afford what it is you're selling, but they've decided to vote with their wallets and pirate your games instead. And it's nobody's fault but your own.